In our last session, we were talking about ratios and proportions. I'd like to go back and revisit that for just a little bit. Do these ratios form a proportion? Well, we found out there were two ways for us to investigate this. The first way was to simplify each and compare. And if the fractions in simplest form are equivalent, then it forms a proportion. Well, 2/3 is already simplified, but if I take 4/12 and divide by a common factor of 4, I get 1/3. So these are not a proportion. Another method would be to use cross products. Cross product says let's take 2 times 12 and compare that to 4 times 3. Well, I have 24, and 24 does not equal 12, so once again, not a proportion. In my second example, again, I look at the one on the left, and that fraction cannot be simplified, but the one on the right, if I divide them both by 4, I'll get 4/3. And you see that that, in simplest form, is equal, so these two form a proportion. Again, we can use cross products. We can multiply the extremes, 4 times 12. We can multiply the means, 3 times 16. When I multiply these out, I get 48 is equal to 48, so this is a proportion. So again, two methods to find out if two ratios form a proportion. What happens when we look at perhaps another example or two? Again, I could simplify, and in this case I divide by 4. 4 will go in there 3 times, and 2, and that is equivalent, so it's a proportion. Or I could do 3 times 8. Does that equal 2 times 12? And that gives me 24 is equal to 24. This is a proportion. One last one before we start not comparing but solving. If I simplify this, and again, you don't have to do both methods, you just choose one. If I divide by 2, and I see that this is not a proportion. Cross products, just to prove it to you. 2 times 12 is 24, and 4 times 10 is 40. Not a proportion. So if you're given two ratios, and you're asked to test out if it forms a proportion, you can do either of these two methods. You don't have to do both. Choose one. But we are going to use cross products most of the time when we are solving. We did the one on the left last week. Let's take a look at the one on the right. I have x plus 2, a ratio of x plus 2 to 5 compared to a ratio of 3 to 8. I'm going to use cross products. I'm going to multiply 8 times x plus 4, my extremes, times my 5 times 3. And when we do this, there could be one variable or two variables, but our goal is to find the value of x that's going to make this true. This is going to give me 8x plus 32 equals 15. I will subtract 32 on both sides. And then I'm going to get 8x is equal to, and again, this is where you stop and you do the math. You could always use your calculator when it comes to these, and I see that I'm going to get a negative 17. I'm going to divide both sides by 8, and I'm going to get x is equal to, now I'm going to get a decimal. It's going to be something like a negative, I believe, 2 and 125 thousandths. So sometimes it's going to get a little bit more involved. Many times we'll get a whole number, sometimes we'll get a decimal. Let's do a few more for practice. Maybe a couple of simpler ones to start with. Solving proportions. Again, our goal is to find the missing term, and we're going to use cross products. We'll do 2 times x minus 2 and then we've got 9 times 4. Here's where our experience with solving equation comes in handy. We're going to distribute. We're going to add. And again, this is just a multi-step equation. We're going to get 2x is equal to 40, and divide by 2, and x is equal to 20. Okay, so x is equal to 20, so this missing term here would be 20 minus 2, which is 18, and again, I can look at this and I can see that's going to be equal. It forms a proportion. Here's another one to try, and this one's only a one step, so let's go back to something simpler. 6 times 10, I'm sorry, x times 10, and 6 times 9. That gives me 10x is equal to 54. Remember, when we divide by 10, we just move our decimal over one place. This becomes 5 4/10. Again, cross multiply, cross products. 12 times x is equal to 9 times 4. I have 12x is equal to 36, and x is equal to 3. Sometimes you'll be able to recognize that from here to here is times 3, or in this case, if I divide by 3 and go back in that direction, divide by 3 again, and 9 divided by 3 gives me 3. You notice, because they're equal, that sometimes you can use what you know about equivalent fractions in order to solve these. Sometimes there's that common element that you could probably look at and decide on your own. Now I'm going to put this equal to sign here, even though I'm not sure if that one's equal, and this one I'm going to solve. Remember, I said I had two methods. I could simplify both. If I divide by a common factor of 4, I get 1/2. If I divide by a common factor of 5, I also get 1/2. So these form a proportion. Remember, I could also use cross products. And this many times is the preferred method. Most people wind up doing that. But the other one's more mental math that could help us to find the answer. So we see this is a proportion. Again, we're doing a number of problems just to help reinforce this today. Here's one where we're solving. So here we're just stating or determining if it is a proportion. Here we're solving. When I see a variable that tells me there's some unknown, I need to solve. Once again, this is just a one step. And if I put 9 back into that ratio, and I go ahead and simplify, divide by 3, divide by 3, divide by 2, divide by 2, it works so that I have 9 is to 3, and 6 is to 2. X was equal to 9. Again, we can do a whole series of these, but I think we'll do one more with the distribution, just so you can see. I'm going to multiply my extremes, which is 3 times 8. It really doesn't matter because of the equal to sign, but you do have to be sure that you are crossing and multiplying. This will give me 24 is equal to 2x minus 4. We will go ahead and add 4 to both sides. Again, we just did a whole section on solving equations, and this is why this follows right through as an application of how to solve a proportion. I get x is equal to 14. I think you've seen a good number of examples. You'll do some practice, and we'll probably have an assessment sometime this week.